COVID-19 has tested our hope and faith as individuals, families, and the country at large. Besides destroying many aspects of our lives, the novel coronavirus has also affected our human rights in many ways. You and the Law, the COVID edition, is a 30-minute weekly television program that focuses on the impact of COVID-19 on human rights in Uganda. The program engages experts to explain the importance of rights-based approaches to the success of any public health response to ensure the respect, protection, and fulfillment of human rights amidst the challenges presented by COVID-19. You and the Law, the television program, brought to you by Legal Hub Uganda, taking the law to the last mile in proud association with I4C Africa Hub and House of Talent Television.
Yes. So, you and the Law, as a program that we're designing in partnership with the House of Talent Television, could you just sort of give us an idea what it's all about?
Yes, thank you. So again, because of our innovativeness, right? We have been able to be recognized by different people, and recently we were one of the winners, under the I4C challenge. That's Innovation for Change, So under that project, one of the things that we thought of was to bring the law to the TV audience, in this country. And again, I believe this is also pioneering in different ways, because other people simply discuss the law from the surface, So we want to unpack the law, to the TV audience. Because I believe the radio will be focusing more on the people in the last mile, But
the TV audience is a bit.
So if you come to Kampala, you realize that the majority of the people only listen to the radio in the morning when they're driving to work, and the evening when they're driving back home. And at that point, someone is a bit anxious, going to work and coming back. So they basically want to listen to music, So we want to see how we can take this television to their offices, to their homes, at their own convenience, So that's why this project comes up, And so we have designed a number of projects, a number of topics that we want to handle under this. So there'll be a COVID edition, but generally we'll be discussing other aspects of the law like you had rightly introduced.
Yeah. So I thought perhaps, I know you've sort of given us a sneak peek into the future, but I thought we could maybe start by revisiting, you mentioned COVID.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, why is it important to actually have a conversation around, COVID and the law? Because this is you and the law, and then suddenly you're talking about, COVID. Some because, COVID is a medical issue. Why are we discussing it in you and the law? You should be telling us about theft, you should be telling us about murder and things like that. So could you sort of try to give us that intersection?
Yes.
So you've sort of unpacked the idea for me in a very basic and simple way. But then I know that for ideas to work, they need to get some force of law. So I'm wondering, do we actually have like a legal framework, be it global, be it African or even national level, that guarantees this right? Because some people could say that those are just your ideas, your wishful thinking. Without a law, how do we enforce it? So I'm wondering, is there any legal backing for this right that you're articulating very well?
Actually, what I've just talked about is picked from the law itself.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Now, this is the legal framework. At international level,
Yes.
many people, because now we are talking with everyone, we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Yes.
Under Article 25, we are talking about the right to adequate food. You understand? Article 20, this is way back in 1948.
So there's a new word there, adequate.
Adequate.
Not just food, but adequate food.
No, and I'm going to be speaking about that. We are talking about adequate food. And I'll be, explaining that. Then, after that, in 1966,
Yes.
we have the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights.
Yes.
Article 11, also articulating that state parties to the convention, to which Uganda is a party because we signed it in 1981, that every state party must respect the right of everyone to adequate food. Then after that we have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights.
Now we are getting home.
Yes, we are getting home. Under Article 16, it is also well articulated. Then after that we have the East African Community Treaty.
Hey, our friends Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Congo, Burundi.
It was signed in 1999, and the many other protocols that have come along the way. Under Article 130, 118, 113, 100 itself, they talk about nutrition. In fact, I have taken a lot of time without suing the East African community. I don't know what I'm doing, because in it, every country that state party to the East African community must have, they even give it a very exotic name.
Yes.
Strategic food reserves.
You've given so many illustrations of the different disabilities.
Right.
But how would we explain disability as a concept? What does it mean before we get an example?
Well, first of all, we need to appreciate the fact that person with disabilities, when one asks you what they mean, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has advised us that these are people who have long-term physical, mental, there are those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, and social impairments, which interaction with other barriers hinders their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So you will see that there could be several barriers in society, and when persons with disabilities engage or interact with these barriers at the end of it all will affect their full and effective participation. And when I talk about the various barriers, I mean barriers including the physical barriers. This relates to the physical environment that must be very clear to our views. We have the physical structures that are not accessible to persons with disabilities. We have the physical structures without ramps. We have physical structures without electronic elevators. We have toilets that are constructed that do not, that are constructed that do not actually are accessible to persons with disabilities. Then we also have attitudinal barriers. That relates to generally attitude.
How we perceive.
How persons with disabilities are being perceived, and then we have communication barriers. Communication barriers, this mainly affects persons with hearing impairments, who include the deaf, who include the hard of hearing persons. I hope our viewers know they can distinguish between the hard of hearing persons and the deaf.
So talking about human rights, Aaron, I know that normally this conversation, especially around lawyers, there's a tendency to rush into the law. But I thought that we could start by just having some explanation of actually what this animal called, human rights is, what shape does it take, what principles sort of guide it, like why is it even important for people to have human rights?
Yeah, many questions. I will start with what human rights is.
Yes.
So human rights, these are entitlements that people have by the very fact of being human. So if you're a human being, you have some rights, you have some privileges and there are expectations you have of your fellow human beings and the state. And the body of law that governs that is called human rights. For example, and also human rights, if you're very religiously inclined, these are rights, you say, given by God. If you're not so religious, you say that they are my rights because I'm a human being. Because a human being has inherent worth, inborn worth, innate worth, worth that is not external, worth that once you're a human being, that's it, you have it. So once you're a human being, you're supposed to, you have privacy. Yeah. The shape of your private parts, what you do with them, that privacy you need to, it's yours by God's grace and by
Allah.
Yeah, you are born with it, yes, or Allah or Buddha or whoever you spiritual anchor you have.
Just to understand really, because we're talking about employment, talking about labor rights.
Yeah.
These are ideas that perhaps many people still need to understand. Like when you talk about employment rights, labor rights, what exactly are we talking about? What does it entail? Why should I even care about labor rights? Is that something I should lose sleep over? Is it a big deal?
True. True. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that question. And maybe even to our investors who is watching this show elsewhere, even outside the country. Why should you care about the labor rights? First of all...
What are they, maybe to start with?
Yeah, I'm going to just come to just that. But why should we care? Because labor is a factor of production. Okay. So in production, we have this labor component, and often than not, when we are planning our businesses and everything, we never think about the labor force itself that actually is going to be doing this particular business that you're setting up or this franchise that you're thinking about. So labor is a factor of production, but it has, and because it's a factor of production, if it's not well handled, it has a direct impact on the production, on the output. So if it's well handled, it also have very positive impact on the output, on the growth of every enterprise, every business that anyone sets up. So we need labor at the end of the day. So that's why you should care about labor. Going back to the law itself, as a country, Uganda is a very progressive country. Yes, when it comes to setting up laws and policies, we are a very progressive country. Even you're looking into the rest of the East African country, we are very progressive. We are a member of the International Labour Organization, and because of that, because it's labor, we have ratified, Uganda has signed quite a number of international conventions. And maybe to the person watching us, conventions are those internationally agreed upon, let me call them sets of like rules and regulations or laws. We can take it like that, literally. So those ones, those international agreed upon sets of laws and rules, is that they give a basis upon which a country goes back and actually contextualize those rules into their setting.
So you've started by sort of taking us a little bit into the legal aspects now, and I thought maybe we'd then take on from there. So when you talk about these rights, what law, makes it mandatory for us to protect, women's rights? Do we have a framework at the national, international, regional level that can enable me say that I'm speaking about women's rights because I have the backing of this law?
Yes. So as I said, broadly for human rights, of course, we know that the one legal framework that we look to, where all the other laws are derived, is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, within there have been other laws that have emerged that are specific to different groups of people, and I'll just restrict myself to women. So at international level, there are quite many. So, but the most pronounced is CEDAW, which really focuses on elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. That is what it stands for. So within this law, there is a framework provided for what women's rights should look like. What countries that subscribe to these international laws should ensure that should ensure that exist within their national laws. So if you look at Uganda as a country, as a signatory to these international covenants, it is within Uganda's mandate to now domesticate or to pull elements of this law and put them in their national law, because international laws have an international application. Yes. So for an international law to be applicable in our context as Uganda, Uganda has to draft a law that takes into consideration components of this law. So within the country, of course, we have the constitution that is very specific on issues of, women's rights. The constitution makes specific mention to, the fact that women are vulnerable and that women, along with other vulnerable groups, should be protected. And the law specifically also provides for affirmative action, very innovative ways through which women can be elevated to the same level, because we know that because of these social norms, many women are excluded from decision making, many women excluded from participation in the public sphere. So the constitution is very specific in terms of, what should happen, but also the constitution gives powers to the parliament to enact other laws that stream from the constitution that are very specific to these vulnerable groups, and specifically women. So from that, we have very many pieces of legislation that entail issues around women's rights. So I'll give an example of some of these laws. We have the Domestic Violence Act that specifically addresses, domestic violence.
Big issue.
Exactly. Yeah. So we also have the Female Genital Mutilation Act that specifically addresses female genital mutilation. You realize that there are certain aspects of women's rights that are unique to women based on these negative norms. Yeah. So for example, female circumcision is not something that applies to men. So that is why the law is very specific. And it does disagree. At least it will not have the word female in it. Yes, so we have the Female Genital Mutilation Act. We also have the Trafficking in Persons, where they're looking at certain practices within the framework of trafficking that have specific application to women. And so you find that these small pieces of legislation address specific areas of women's rights, but also within other legal frameworks, other laws, you realize that there are specific aspects that promote the rights of women, that promote equality, that promote non-discrimination, that promote elements of equity. Equity is really, you're not striving to make people equal, but that you're creating a platform that raises them to a certain level where they can fairly participate with other groups. Yes.
But I'm curious to know that this idea, what is its legal basis? Because you could be just telling me fancy things you read in textbooks or things you check out in American journals or publications in the EU. And then, but our reality, we're in Uganda.
Yes.
So I'll just ask, what makes rule of law as a concept binding on Uganda? Is there a law that prescribes for it in Uganda or in the region, even the global stage?
Thank you. You see, we're talking about rule of law and their principles. So in Uganda, we have a number of laws, but the chief law, and in Uganda it's even better, they call it Semateeka, is the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda.
Yes.
And in Uganda they call it Semateeka. You've heard of Namunswa? The queen of the anthill.
Yes.
So there are those names. So the chief law is the constitution.
Yes.
And the constitution is the effect that this is the supreme law of the country.
Yes.
And any other laws emanate from this constitution. Even if it is that clan taking a decision. You've heard of people who say when a girl gets pregnant, we roll them off a cliff and they die.
Yes, yes.
But the constitution is saying if there is any custom that says otherwise to the constitution, that custom is null and void, because everyone's right to life has been preserved by the constitution, which is the supreme. So the constitution is telling us no one should die except if court has sentenced you to death.
Yeah.
Now, if you a clan leader, in all your glory, you think that you can just roll down someone's daughter, off the cliff and they die, then you are going against the law. Therefore, you're going against the rule of law because you're not respecting the constitution. So out of the constitution, there are various laws. and the Constitution gives Parliament to make power. At some point, Parliament also delegated some functions of making law to the minister. The issue of COVID-19, all these regulations that people have been hearing about.
Yes.
By the way, they think that they're presidential. They think that these laws are by the president.
Yeah, I know we'll come to. Analyze that. Yes.
But that's a minister's function. So we wanted to have a situation where not every time you'll have to call MPs to sit. So somewhere in the Constitution, in the Acts of Parliament, the parliamentarians delegated some of that function to the minister, but also to be exercised judiciously and not in a wanton manner.
Yes.
That Mr. Ochom is a difficult man. Let me make a law and say that he will not eat food for the rest of his life. No. It has to be judiciously so that we promote a harmonious society.
I mean, it's very interesting because then they seem to have focused only on matters that maybe for things that will be, before court. I don't know if there's anything they did around resolving land issues, say, around during using the local council codes or other structures, because I'm sure that even within then there were a lot of cases arising in this period. But again, like you said, some of these issues are better explained by the people in the ministry. But we could then sort of try then to look at what do you make of those interventions? Did they work? Didn't they work? What could have been, any challenges encountered in the course of trying to enforce some of those protections that were issued by the government of Uganda?
Maybe I'll start by referring back to what you said, that the focus was mainly on evictions and evictions that are issued by court. All legal evictions must be issued through a court order. But I think at the time the government was looking at which is the biggest threat right now, which is possibly rendering some people landless and having nowhere to go during desperate times. So it was trying to avoid that, and it seemed like the biggest threat at that point. So I imagine that is why the ministry decided to focus, the ministry and judiciary, on land evictions during that time.
Well, it's a big problem in the country anyway.
Yes, it is. It's definitely a big problem. And then also the spirit or the attitude of impunity, that despite there being practice directives, despite there being practice directions, and directives by the ministry, evictions continued to happen. Each and every other day on the media, we saw an eviction story happening. So I think, of course, these measures did not necessarily work. Because it continued to happen despite,
Okay, Rose, you mentioned that we don't have an express law on the right to health. So how have you been? What have you been basing your advocacy on? Because then people would say, it's not by mistake that Uganda has not ratified this. Maybe it's by design. I don't know. So where do you then derive your mandate from, especially at the national level?
At a national level, where we derive our mandate from, as I said, our constitution within itself doesn't expressly provide for the right to health. But thereunder, they have a particular provision where they say that all the rights that are stated within Chapter 4 do not preclude other rights that are contained in any other instrument. They equally go ahead to say that if Uganda has ratified any other international instrument, then it can be enforced under the Constitution. So we have ratified the International Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. We've also ratified the African Charter, which provides for the right to health under Article 14. So we can therefore enforce them there.
Also, you squeeze around.
So it's a tall order. You go around the mountain, go around, but ultimately you arrive. But our Supreme Court, in a recent decision that was passed last year, I think it is a case that we had litigated on maternal health, where we were talking challenging government's failure to provide basic maternal health commodities within public health facilities. Court agreed with us, and they said that the right to health is intrinsically provided for in the Constitution and therefore can be enforced. So that within itself, by court making that pronouncement, you can rely on that direct.
You will survive under the yeah, because Supreme Court definitely makes law. What is your assessment of how COVID-19, the interplay between COVID-19 and gender-based violence?
Thank you, Jonathan. So one of the first things I want to let people know, we've had many people blame COVID to have brought gender-based violence, but COVID is not the problem. It has, COVID is not the problem. It has been there before. Gender-based violence was there before COVID-19. So one of the things we have to understand is when COVID-19 came, the stringent measures that you talked about, the restrictions, the lockdowns, are the ones that accelerated the numbers and increased them. So when people were locked down, especially the first lockdown where people are not allowed to move, and we realized that people like you, the lawyers, were not allowed to work, you are considered non-essential, by the way.
Yeah, so, but nobody has been more needed at that point, yeah.
So mainly what we have to understand, those restrictions increased the rate. And then that was because many people were stuck with their abusers. Most of the times, yes.
Okay.
So,
I thought people were stuck with their spouses, their loving spouses.
There are people that were stuck with their loving children, loving spouses, but then there are also those people that were stuck with abusers. Most of the times, there are people that will go out there and they look for a sexual partner, but then now you're stuck in a home and you're with people that don't even connect with you. So the next thing you're thinking about is, okay, what do I do now?
What would you be assessment of the steps the government of Uganda took to curb the spread of the virus?
Well, I think we did well at first, because to everyone, things were quite clear that we needed to avoid many people dying. And in fact, people were scared.
Yes.
There was a time when they declared the second lockdown. Actually, people were compliant. There's a time people took it upon themselves, for example, to wear masks.
Yes.
So there was a huge level of discipline and cooperation with government. But you know, because people have different interests,
yes,
the people have economic issues to deal with on a daily, because they must put food on the table. So many people, I think, you know, get mixed up, you know, because they want to live, but they also want to live on their feet.
Yes.
They want to put food on the table.
Yeah.
Because you can't afford to have a crying child in your house because you're following probably the SOPs.
Who doesn't even understand
For
COVID.
them, they want to eat food.
Yes.
So I think we did well, but I think over time, I think we have forgotten to review the timelines. For example, if we talk about the night curfew, is it still having any relevance? Because it's affecting people's other rights, movement, assembly, and all these things. So is it still achieving a legitimate purpose? Because people have argued in different parts, in Kenya and other places, they're saying, what does COVID-19 have to do with the people staying in their houses in the night? And yet at daytime, they're in Chikubo,
yes,
in their thousands. So I think government needs to strike a balance. I think there needs to be review, because this curfew, some of them have stayed for a very long time. In Kenya now, they're saying that they don't see the relevance of the night curfew, for example. They're saying let the economy be opened. And I think it's a compelling argument, because so many economies around the world have suffered as a result of the COVID restrictions. Countries have lost taxes and things like that. So I think Uganda tried, but I think more review needs to be done with a view to opening up the economy. Yeah.
Someone could argue that perhaps a lot of transmission happens in the night because the economic activities perhaps done at night, you know, people could be in a bar, in a party mode, and a lot of mingling that could justify us being asked to go home early. But you know, that's just perhaps a view. Emma, we need to then think about what we learn, because I don't think that if COVID-19 ended and there's nothing we learn as a country, I think that would be a bit of a problem. What do we learn from the COVID response? What what lessons can we pick that perhaps can be used to respond to a similar situation if it happened in future?
Yeah, like I have stated previously before, we need to think about planning, better planning. Planning is always key because we have failed in most instances. Most of our reactions to very many things have always been chaotic. So the government needs to plan better.
Yes.
We need to embrace technology like government has been speaking of late since last year during the COVID. Plan, I mean technology. But if we're talking about technology, for example, campaigns were taken to radio and other media mechanisms. But even then, government followed people towards radio stations. You heard that some presidential candidates had appeared on radio stations to campaign, and for some reason the radio station could be switched off. You know, so if we're saying that we're embracing technology and all the things, then allow people to express themselves within that. Last year, I think a year before, we saw government came up with a tax, social media tax of sorts.
Yes.
The OTT. Now they have removed it because of the poor reaction from the people.
Yes.
They removed it and now they have imposed a tax on buying data. So if we're talking technology, then you should be making data affordable to the people. For now, by imposing a tax, I think it's like 12% or something like that, it's unaffordable to many people. So it becomes a luxury that is enjoyed by a few people. So we need to think of better ways. Also, we need to think of funding innovations that enabled people to enjoy similar rights. Our country, I think, lags behind. You cannot easily find many companies, entities, or even the government that is willing to put in money into innovations. The innovations are left behind, and we're talking about technology now. So most of the money which is coming into innovations to enable us enjoy some of these rights is coming from outside the country. So, but if government is taking a leading role in fighting for technology to be embraced, then we should have homegrown solutions, even including funding to some of these innovations. Yeah.